Buju, Ben Hinmon and Disnakaz, Kushmanse and Disnakaz, Mukwa and Dodem, Saginaw, Swan Creek and Black River, Ojibwe and Dao. My name is Ben Hinmon. My spirit name is Kingfisher. I'm a cultural representative for the 7th Generation program, and I work primarily in the wood and stone shops doing hands-on crafts with the community. I've been here for about 12 years, and one of the projects that really is a community favorite is cedar boxes. And even though the cedar boxes are more of a contemporary expression, they have many uses, and of course cedar is Gijik. Cedar is one of our primary medicines of the 4 sacred medicines. And today people use the cedar boxes to protect their eagle feathers, to keep them safe from mites and other things, because mites don't really like cedar. They might keep other sacred objects like powagons, their pipes. Sometimes they'll keep those in cedar boxes. Medicines, if we have them in the home, the cedar box could be used for keeping that. And lots of other important objects to family members. It's almost 13 years I've worked at the 7th Generation program. I think I've made a little over between 600 and 700 boxes that are somewhere out there in the community in family homes. So with the COVID-19 coronavirus going on and all of us trying to social distance and keep safe, 7th Generation is going to be offering a take-home program where you can actually pick up a kit with the clamps to actually build your own cedar box right at home. And so what we're going to be doing today is walking through step by step the tools that you're going to need to fully assemble your box, and the kit itself and how it is to be assembled. And it's kind of interesting that the cedar boxes, when I first came here, were designed a little differently, and we were having some problems with them with the longevity of the boxes. So we redesigned the boxes so that they're much stronger, makes them much easier to use, and they're beautiful boxes. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do, how we get started. So over here on this table, if you're ever interested in just doing the work yourself and you've got access to a table saw and a bandsaw, this is the stock that we start with. It's Cedar Essentials Aromatic Red Cedar Planking, but it's basically red cedar planking. It has the tongue and groove on the sides of it because, of course, you're putting this into, let's say, your closet to protect your clothing from moths and stuff like that. So this is what a raw board would look like. Now, in order to prepare for cedar boxes, we of course have to take off this edge for the tongue and groove and the edge on the other side. And so we're trimming all of that off, and we end up with approximately a 3.5 inch wide plank that is then usable for cutting various sizes of cedar boxes. In this instance, we're going to be doing an 18-inch cedar box, which is a pretty standard size for many of the feathers that we have on eagles. And so this is a real popular size. This is a 20-inch box sitting in front of us. This is what it looks like when it's in a finished state. And so we're going to start by talking about how this assembly is actually going to work. There are 6 pieces to the cedar box, 2 sides, the bottom, which is actually cut to 3¼ inches, the 2 end pieces, which are also 3¼ inch pieces, and generally it takes 2 complete planks to make 1 cedar box. So if you've got 2 of those planks, you're cutting off 6 pieces of that. And then there's the top. And the top will come already rounded off, so you'll know which one is the top because all the edges are rounded off. And that'll be the last step in assembling the box. But there are basically, again, 6 components to every box. So the assembly is pretty easy, but you really need to follow the steps, otherwise your box isn't going to hold together. And we don't want that to happen. So step 1 is to lay all of your parts out that you're going to be working on immediately. I like to put them in the, lay them out so that I know how the assembly is going to go. Step 2 is you're going to take, I recommend the Titebond 2 premium wood glue, which is a very strong glue. Actually, it's even stronger than wood. If the box does come apart, the wood will break before this glue does once it dries. And so, as we're going to apply the glue to the edges of the box, and we're going to do a thin line along each of the walls, the side panels. Pretty straightforward. You don't want to put too much glue. It's going to take a longer drying time, and you're going to have a mess because it's going to spill out the sides once you apply the clamps. So both of the sides get a nice line of glue on it like this. Move around so you're comfortable. Again, more glue is not better. Everybody thinks more is better. That's not the case all the time. So you can see I'm putting the glue along the outer wall and then at the bottom, because when this panel comes up, it's going to hit, it'll be joined to 3 parts of the box, which makes it stronger. And then on the top of the bottom piece, we're going to put it right along that edge and along the opposite edge. And then step 3 is we are going to take the end pieces and we're going to place those as close as we can as where they need to be. The glue should be enough to keep them in place temporarily, although sometimes that doesn't work out, they will fall. But it's not a big problem. So I want to get them to as close as possible as where I need them at. And then I'm going to take the panel that's away from me. I'm going to bring that in, line it up as closely as I can to where I need it. And then the panel directly in front of me, I'm going to put that in place. Now, this is important. That bottom piece of wood a lot of times will warp. And so when you're putting in the very first clamps, they're going to go directly at the bottom. So you've got everything kind of flattened out. So I'm going to put some pressure on this end to try and get, and then I'm going to hand line up all my pieces again. I'm not going to worry about the other end right now. Then I'm going to put my clamp in place. And there's a small mark on the inside of the clamp. It's like a cross. You want that clamp to be right on that middle mark, because you might have to move these around or get something in between them. So there we go. That's better. So I want to leave myself room to work. So there's the first clamp. I'm going to go over to the other side now. Get this in place. Do some small adjustments. And then I'm going to apply the second clamp. It's a ratcheting clamp, so you just basically pull the trigger and it's going to go right where you need it to. tighten it down. Don't tighten it completely because you're going to want to make some small adjustments as you're working on the box. And then once you've got it kind of generally where you want to tighten those down. Now the next clamp is actually going to go about a 1/4 inch from the very top. You'll tighten that down. There's your second clamp. Again, make any adjustments you need to try and keep everything square. There's the second clamp. Now, that's going to hold my box together so I can begin the rest of the clamping process. And then I'm going to take the next clamp and I'm going to put it in between the other two clamps at a bit of an angle like this. And I'm going to tighten that down. And what that's going to do is going to close up that end. You can see that glue coming out from here. That way there's no gaps in the box itself. If you end up with a lot of gaps, it's not going to be a very strong hold. So, got that one in place. I take the next one, I'm going to tilt it in the same direction. Clamp that down. And that way I know I've got all my pieces in place. And then I'm going to take it, flip it over so it's kind of leaning toward me. I'm going to lean it toward you so you can see. I know there was a little bit of warping, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take just my fingers, push the plank into place, hold it, take the clamp with my other hand, collapse it a little bit, and I'm going to do the middle clamp first. And then I'm going to go down the box evenly. Spread these clamps out so I'm getting a good seal on that bottom panel. Again, checking it to make sure it's still pretty flush and adjusting it if I have to. And that will be the first phase of your cedar box build. And now, look it over. You're going to want to make sure everything is, all the seams are tight. If you've got some glue left over on your table, you're going to want to take a damp cloth, wipe that off. If you put too much glue on the box and you've got a ton of it spilling out everywhere, you're going to want to take a damp cloth and just kind of wipe that off. There's not too much here, and that's one of the reasons I tell you or mention that too much glue isn't always good. It's not going to make the box stronger, put it that way. So after this is done, I'm going to give this at least 45 minutes to dry. And it actually takes 24 hours for the glue to completely set up. But at 45 minutes, it's set enough so that I can do the next step of the box. So that's step one. And we're gonna stop right here for a minute. So we took a little 45-minute break just to let this box set up properly. Looked it over a little bit. I can see where all the glue is finally dried up. There's a few spots where there's a little excess glue, but not bad. So now I'm going to take off all the clamps, and we will then put on the lid of the box. And one of the common questions I get all the time is, if you glue the lid on the box, how does it open? And it's a great question because a lot of people were like reluctant to even put the lid on the box because it was a bit of a mystery. So we'll address that as soon as I get this on. Now, The lid, as I mentioned, has already got a rounded edge, and that's because it's the top of the box. So I'm going to check the fitment, and it fits perfectly on the edges, but there's in the middle, there's a little bit of a bow on the box. And so what I do to address that, to make sure I'm going to get a good fitment, is I square up my edges. But first things first, more glue, more wood glue. And again, more is not better. Oh, wait, back up a step. You're going to have 3 grits of paper. There's going to be a half sheet of 80 grit, which is a very coarse grit. You're going to have a half sheet of 120 grit, which is a little finer, and then a quarter sheet of 220, which is all it's going to take to do the finish sanding. So it comes in a half sheet. All you have to do is fold the paper, the rough coarse side in, fold it back once like that, and it'll come right apart. So you're going to want to fold that in half so it's easy to hold on to. And then check your edges, the ends of the box. There may be a little bit of an edge there that you want to take off. It takes a couple seconds to take that off so that when your lid goes on, it's going to fit nice and smooth. There's not going to be a lip there. So you're going to have a good seal on it. And a little trick you might want to try, one moment, is to find a nice flat piece of wood like this, wrap your paper right over it, fold it into itself, and that way you know you're not getting a nice flat edge. If you've got a little bit more on one side than you do the other, then it's going to help you. Like I said, it should only take a couple of seconds. Done. So, now we've got that done. Taking off any excess dust. You're going to go to your next step, which is add some more glue. Make sure you're comfortable when you're doing this. And your glue may get gummed up because it's been sitting. So if you've got something with a pointed edge on it, just clean that out real quick. Comes right out of there. All little helpful tips. And then again, a little bit of glue all the way around. Nice bead. Just like that. And you may want to take your finger, have a little rag, wet rag next to you, rub that along the edge. Smooth it out a little bit so you don't have too much excess. Just like that. Once I've got that done, I get it lined up again. And then there's that little bit of a bow. So what you're going to do is you're going to take one of your clamps, slide it on there, just kind of draw that box in a little bit, press it down and make sure you're where you want to be. Everything lined up as much as you can. Then I'm going to dangle this edge over the side of the table a little bit, make whatever adjustments I need to make. Take one of my clamps, put it right in the middle, just like that. That locks down that edge. I'm going to flip this one over. Another clamp. Lock it down. And then I'm going to start right next to the center clamp. Clamp that way. So I'm paying attention to where the lid is at to make sure I've got it lined up with the top properly as I'm adding the other clamps in. So if it's off a little bit, I can just adjust it with finger pressure. And it's really important at this step is to make sure that there are no gaps. So you're going to go back and you're going to look at the edges, and generally these corners are going to pop up. So you're going to go back in. You do have a gap someplace. You don't want to pop those down. Then I'm going to take this one off because I don't really need it there anymore. It's my final clamp. Like I said, there's always those corners that are going to get popped up on you. So these are ratcheting clamps. So all you do is go back around, make sure they're tight. You can see where there's some glue spilling out around the edges. Take a damp cloth. I'm going to wipe off that excess. You don't want it right on the top of the lid like that. So that's kind of what it's going to look like when you're done. See all the edges. Now we've got a complete box. So while I'm waiting for that to dry, there are two things that are going to happen next. What are the next thing that's going to happen is I'm going to have to get my brass hinges ready. And so I'm going to peel the cardboard off the back of this and try and preserve it because it's actually one of my tools I use to square up the hinge later on. So I use something I got handy dandy around. And I'm going to save that. That's actually a spacer, believe it or not. Over time building boxes, you learn little tricks of the trade. And I'm going to leave my hinges there, but I want all of my screws out, right? My set screws for the hinges. I'm going to take that rag that I've been using, and the screws are just, the stock that I'm using is 1/4 inch thick. So if I don't cut off the ends of these screws, it's going to come through the back of the box, and if you're putting your hands in there, you're probably going to get scratched. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take nice pair of DeWalt wire cutters. So you just want to take it in one hand, place it so you've got about 1/4 inch of screw left. It's pretty easy. And then these things like to go flying when you cut them. Little trick, rag under it, cup it, clip it. You'll end up with your screw being exactly the right length. So while you're waiting for the box to dry, it's a good use of your time. It doesn't take that long to go in and just clip all those real quick. And like I said, if you don't cup it, it's going to go flying. They don't all have to be exactly the same length. Once you figure out how to hold the screw, they're going to come up pretty much the same. It's that simple. If you use a standard pair of wire cutters, those screws are going to feel like hardened steel because it's all, all your force is just then hand strength. Like I said, that little float in the middle helps out a lot. So, we got time to kill, do something useful. Take those, put them back in to the case until you need them. Don't lose one because they come with exactly 12 screws. And if you lose one, you're going to have to figure out a way to replace it. So. That easy. I'm going to set those aside. Now, I do have a box that is completed. I'm going to let this dry. Now we're going to talk about this. Obviously, there's no way to open up the box. So what, in this instance, you're either going to have access to a bandsaw, or you're going to have to schedule an appointment with 7 Gen, bring the box back in, and we'll cut the top for you. Prior to that, though, you're going to want to use this sandpaper that we've provided, the 80 first. So you start with the lowest number, which is the roughest grit, and you're going to want to sand the entire box. And when you're sanding these boxes, again, fold it in half. You don't need to square it up. You're going to work with the grain. If you sand it this way, you're going to end up with a bunch of scratches in your box. So you want to work with the length of the grain. There'll be some little imperfections along the edge where we put the lid on. So you're going to want to be careful and go back over that. Get that smoothed out. Work your way through the 80, the 120. Once you get the 120 done, it's going to feel pretty smooth, right? Make sure you take, in between sandings, you take your handy dandy shop rag and you wipe it off because the dust is going to stay into little cracks and crevices that you need to take out and you won't see them. Make sure you've got a good light someplace so you can take a look at it. Make sure that you've got all of the imperfections out, flip it over, all the edges, including the bottom because there's going to be an edge there for sure. And if you've got that out with the 80, then it's time to move on to the 120. Same process, wipe it off, put it up to the light, feel it, make sure there's no obvious imperfections in the box. Once you get it to that step, we're going to go to the next step, which is cutting the lid. So if you do have access to a bandsaw, it's a pretty simple process. So we're going to move into the shop for a minute. Can we do that? So the first and most important thing, whenever you're going to work around heavy machinery like this is a Laguna 18BX bandsaw. Has a 1-inch rough cut blade on it. So it's actually an industrial saw. It's the one I like to use because it does such clean cuts. As long as your blade is nice and straight. You want to make a couple of adjustments, but most importantly, you want to make sure you're wearing protective gear, right? So there's a lot of dust that's going to come off of this. So I'm going to put on my N95 dust mask. And because it's loud, I'm just going to slap on some earphones, protect the ears. Believe it or not, I'm a master stone sculptor. I experience ringing in my ears sometimes because I didn't use these. So it's important that if you're going to be around big equipment like this, that sound, even though it doesn't sound a lot of the time, the decibels are quite high. So you will do damage to your hearing. So safety gear first. Even if you look silly, it's worth it. And then eye protection. These are my grandpa glasses, but they're high impact, so I don't have to worry about it. So first thing, this is my guide. And basically it's a square guide that comes with the machine. I want to decide where I want to cut the lid at. Generally it's between 1 inch and 1.25 inches. Once I get that set, I want to bring the blade down a little bit so I don't have too much floating around. Lock that blade back down, that adjustment down. Lock down my guide. And you want to be extremely careful around anything that has a blade on it. So also I have a push tool. Once I get it to a certain point, I'm going to push it through with the tool rather than getting my hands anywhere near this blade. So I'm going to fire it up. Now with this hand, I want to make sure I'm staying against the guide. With this hand, I'm going to slowly begin to feed it through. Take your time, not a race. That's simple. Again, never get your fingers or any part of your body too close to that blade. This one has a brake, thank God, so I can stop it and I don't leave it running in case somebody comes by accidentally and touches that blade. But what you end up with is your lid for your box. And now we'll go back into the other studio. So we've got our lid cut. It actually does a pretty clean cut, but you're going to see there's still some little burrs on there. You can kind of just take those off with your finger. And then you're going to want to lightly run over it with a piece of sandpaper, just the 80 grit. Don't spend a lot of time with it. Just anywhere there's obviously chatter marks from the blade. Just make sure you got all those little obvious chatter mark out of it. You don't have to spend a lot of time on it. And by the way, the box I'm working on sat for at least 24 hours before I started working on it again. So I know the glue is fully cured and hardened. Now, once I've done that, I want to line my box back up. That's backwards, I can tell already. The reason I can tell is the grains have to match up. As you can see now, all the grains are lining up where they're supposed to be. And so when I begin to the next step, which is to drill the holes for the hinges, so I've obviously, you're going to get 12 clamps with each of the kits. So you're not going to have any extras to do what I'm doing right now. What I'm going to do next, take the box and I'm going to decide what's the front and what's the back. And what I'm going to do is look at the overall presentation of the box and say to myself, what's going to look best? So I'm going to look at the cut, and the smoothest part of the box is this. So that's going to be my front. This is going to be my back. So when I lay it down, I'm going to put the front down. I'm going to get everything lined up where it needs to be, all the corners. I'm going to take the clamp. I'm going to clamp that end. I'm going to do the same thing down here, make sure I got all the corners lined up good. And remember I said save that piece of cardboard? That's going to be my guide to space the hinges and to line those up, right? So I'm going to take this, line it up with the edge of the box. I'm going to take the hinge, and here's the interesting thing, right? The strength of the hinge is where the three, that's the bottom of the hinge, believe it or not. There are 3 barrels there, which offer more strength. So I want those down on the box. And if you look real closely, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the top hinge, which has a small break in it. You can just barely see it, but there's a small break right there. And I'm going to line that break up with the cut of the box. And that way, I know it's going to be straight. So I'm going to do that at both sides. Got my next hinge. Figure out which one is the bottom. Line it up with the break. Okay, voila. Now they're evenly spaced. Now they do sell, it's called a self-centering bit. They're about 12 bucks. They're for making boxes. And the problem with your hinges is if you don't mark the center of each hole properly, then your hinges are going to twist on you. So you want to hold it in place with one hand. Take your awl, find the center, mark it. So I'm coming in from the side, marking where I need to drill that hole at. And all of this comes out of a lot of trial and error. Just be careful you don't let the hinge move while you're doing this, because then you'll be way off. So I'm just leaving a mark there for those. I come down here and repeat the process. Coming in from an angle. And once I've marked those, now I know where I have to drill. Now for this particular screw, the set screw, you want to use a bit that's not going to create too big an opening. So you want to have a nice, I mean obviously this is about a $30 drill bit set. I think it's DeWalt, and they're called Golden Blacks, but they are they're sharp so that they don't dance around. Sometimes if you get a dull drill bit, the second you put it on your wood, it dances to the left or dances to the right. In this case, you don't want that to happen. You don't want to dance. So I want to put that bit in. And one of the most common mistakes I see when people are drilling the holes in the box is A, they're missing their mark. So make sure they're clear. Go back, widen those up a little bit. Not going to hurt the box. You're going to make sure you get your bit where it needs to be. People ask me how I developed this technique. I said, I call it bengineering. Again, trial and error. When you are doing something repetitively, you're going to learn something new every time you do it. So, got all my holes marked. I'm going to let the drill do the work. That's important. And never stop the drill. Once it goes through the box, first of all, you want to make sure you're straight up and down, right? But once the drill is in, don't stop it, because what's going to happen is your bit's going to get stuck. So just straight down, straight out, straight down, straight out. That's the trick. Make sure you're right above wherever you're going to be drilling. Get it as straight up and down as possible. See? Straight in, straight out. Get it lined up with that hole you pre-made. Straight in, straight out. Now, if you happen to have the self-centering bits, which I recommend, I haven't got them yet because I just learned about them. I recommend you get them. It's worth the $12. Wood shop guys will tell you this over and over again. Work smarter, not harder. Makes sense, right? So there's the pilot holes. I've got my hinges all set up. I'm going to put those back in here because they're not ready to go on yet. I want to have this all set up because the final step is, of course, going to be putting the hardware on the box. The next step is actually one of the trickiest, and it's putting the acrylic on the box. And you can see the difference in color. It's almost like a magical process. This is a finished box, and this is a non-finished box. And although it's pretty already, it looks good. So, I'm going to put the very first coat of acrylic on this so you can see it. And I'm going to do it right over here. Always do this in a well-ventilated area. I don't recommend this room in particular. If it's nice weather outside and you don't have a lot of breeze, you can do it outside. I'm going to move these out of the way real quick. And then I'm going to grab myself some paper. Doesn't have to be any kind of special paper, but I want to lay out something to spray the boxes on so I'm not getting the table all messed up. I'm going to take my boxes, put them on like this. And what I recommend, because I've used every other kind of acrylic spray, is Rust-Oleum triple thick glaze. It's a high gloss coating. It's going to take 3 coats. The first time you spray these boxes, all you're doing is sealing the wood. The color is going to change, but all you're really doing is sealing the wood with the first coat. If you overspray, just like the glue, it doesn't mean it's going to be a better product. Overspraying will result in pooling, and it will run down the sides, and you'll see all the runs. You won't see it right away, but once you pick the box up, you're going to go, oh my God, I oversprayed it again. So, get my glasses on. And the trick is not to be on top of the box like this. That's going to cause pooling, right? If I'm that close. So, shake it up good, and then I'm just going to, just like that. Nice even coat. I'm going to come back and do a second and third coat on this. But I don't want to get too close to it again. You can see the colors changing. And one of the things you're going to notice right away is that wherever there's a knot, they're thirsty, right? Doesn't matter. That's the first coat. You don't want to do more or less than that. You're going to give this enough time to dry to touch. So generally about 30, 35 minutes, and it's dry to touch. It's still going to be tacky, but you can do the second and third coat once it's dry to touch. Don't, make sure you give it at least 30 minutes before you check it. And then when you get around to your, when you get to the third coat, you're going to end up with a nice finish like that. You can see how shiny that is. Takes a lot of the imperfections out of it. And it changes the entire color of the wood. Once that's done, you're ready for the final step. Now I'm hoping that I can show you with this box. I've already got the pilot holes done for the hinges. I did this box, 6 months ago, before the pandemic hit. And another important thing, the acrylic finish, just like the glue, has to harden. I recommend at least 24 hours before you clamp those ends, because otherwise you're going to leave, it's not going to be fully hardened, and you're going to leave imprints in the acrylic finish, and you're going to see it as soon as you take the clamps off. So I've got those in place. It's pretty good. This is the same hinge. It is, thank God, because I buy hinges all the time, and sometimes they're just slightly different. So I'm going to take those, put those in place where I need them. Standard Phillips screwdriver, I think it will work with these screws. And here's where it gets a little tricky. Okay, I was wrong. That's not going to work. That one's a little too thick. Obviously, it has to have the right head on it. Otherwise, it's not going to fit the Phillips head on the screw. Taking this down, and I'm just going to get it started. And there's probably a little bit of spray gumming it up, which isn't a bad thing because it actually will make the screws fit a little tighter. I'm going to go to the outside screws first. Get them all started. Okay, come on. There we go. So, repeat the process with this, but then I'm going to go in and I'm going to do opposite screws. And the reason I'm doing that is because I don't want this to flip around, right? So if I tighten the opposite corners, chances are it's going to be exactly where I need it. So then I'll come in and do the center screws. It looks like it's lined up pretty good. Don't over tighten the screws. In other words, snug. Don't reef on them. If you reef on them, you're definitely going to strip the wood out, and you'll have to fix that with some glue, and it's going to be a pain, so don't do it. Just get the screw in there to fit nicely. Snug, that's it. Some of the screws are going to start easier than others. You're going to want to drop them. Don't do that. Just take your time, be patient. If you start forcing stuff, that's when you run into problems. And always, always follow the instructions. I know I watched people open up kits in here in the craft room, and they'll just start putting stuff together, and then I'll hear, "Ben, what's up?" "Well, this isn't fitting right." My first question is, did you follow the instructions? Well, no. It's not rocket science. It's also not a rocket. And a lot of these hinges, when you first install them, they're going to be a little bit tight, just because they're new hinges and it's a new box. This is actually a box one of my students built. Didn't have a chance to finish it, so he'll be happy when he stops back in. Take your clamps off, and voila, you finished your first cedar box. So it's that simple, but it's that complicated. You know, they're beautiful boxes when they're done. We never finish the insides of the boxes. The reason we don't do it is because we want it as natural as possible, especially if you're putting eagle feathers in there. That natural medicine from that box is going to take care of those feathers. So that's it in a nutshell. It's not that difficult as long as you follow the process. And like I mentioned earlier, I've probably done over 600 of these boxes are out there in the community someplace. The boxes that are going to come in the kits are not going to have any of the ornamentation on the top. Later on, if you decide to come in and you want to add something to it, we're more than happy to help you cut out some kind of ornamentation to go on top of the box. This is still looking, it's actually not bad. There's a couple of spots that are still wet, so I'm going to give that a little time. As soon as that's done to touch, I'm going to do the second coat and the third coat. And again, remember, don't spray the box this close. You're going to get puddles all the way across. It's nice, even coat just like this. And you're going to get a much better product. It's not going to run on you. It's just going to look a lot better. 3 coats, that's all you should need. If you want to put an extra coat on it, that's fine. But that's it in a nutshell. Good luck. Have fun.